Well, that's how our live stream is starting. So
Hi everyone, welcome back to Crime Talk Tea Time.
we're happy to be here. We're happy to continue discussing the Laci Peterson case.
Yes.
Which you sent me a really interesting clip today.
I did, yes. Talking about Scott Peterson's motion to request a retrial, which is pretty...
Which, that's not super novel because he's been doing this since he was convicted.
Right.
All death row convictions get an automatic appeal. So he was automatically appealed. He did not win his appeal, I guess, but I think they submitted a second appeal.
So let's back up a little bit
Okay.
for those that are tuning in for the first time. We're obviously covering the Scott and Laci Peterson case, and we've covered a lot in our first few installments, but kind of where we ended things, or where we left off back in 2004, Scott Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder of his wife Laci, and second-degree murder of his son Connor. And so he was convicted of both of those crimes. He was appealed, if you will.
That's what I guess that's I don't know if that's the law everywhere, but I think that's what it is in California in the very least.
Right, because back in 2005 he was sentenced to lethal injection. Yes.
But he's still with it.
He's still very much with us. And it was kind of crazy too, actually revisiting some of these articles that have been kind of published within the last year or so in regards to him possibly getting a retrial. You can see photos of him in court wearing a mask and everything, which is just
modern
signs of the times. Yeah. It's weird to go from photos of him back in 2004, fast forward to like a year ago. He's still
with us. He's among us.
Living and thriving. Yeah.
Among us.
And so, yeah, it's just definitely kind of interesting to see the contrast of that. So back in August of 2020, the death sentence that he received was basically was overturned. Right?
Yes, because Judge
Noteworthy.
DeLucchi, who was presiding over his case, was only allowing jurors that supported the death penalty, or
Right.
when asked if you support the death penalty, they did not answer no.
Right.
In the Hulu documentary that covers Laci Peterson's murder, that actually inspired me to cover this one and kind of discuss it. One of the, I don't know if it's a former prosecutor or a lawyer, she said he should have asked the people, even though you don't agree with the death penalty, would you be able to apply it to this case? She says that's like the necessary question to ask next. I don't really agree with that because, I don't know, I also think in court they assume people are telling the truth. It's actually hard to lie on the stand because lawyers are really good at twisting your words.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I don't know. I think, like, there's people like me, like, I don't know if I support the death penalty. Like, there's definitely been cases where people were sentenced to death and then later found innocent, even in Texas, which is super death penalty happy. So,
two phrases that you don't think of using together in a sentence are death penalty and happy, but hey,
true.
To each their own. So yeah, they did go ahead and dismiss jurors who were opposed to capital punishment. And so because of that, Scott Peterson's lawyer alleges that, he wasn't able to receive a fair trial as he deserves. I think it is definitely difficult for someone like Scott Peterson in a case that is so heavily publicized and continues to be talked about, obviously as evidenced by our conversation. I think it would be difficult to pull off a fair trial for him. You would have to find jurors that had very little or no knowledge of the case.
I remember when he got sentenced to death. I was in Mom's expedition. I think she was picking me up from school or something, but she turned up the radio and they announced that Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. And I said, "Who's Scott Peterson?" And she said, "He murdered his pregnant wife in California."
Right.
And that's who I knew Scott Peterson was. And then later, getting interested in true crime, looked into it a little bit. I don't think it was possible for him to have a fair trial probably anywhere. Same with O.J. Simpson. Like, do I think O.J. Simpson's innocent? No. Do I think he could have ever gotten a fair trial?
Probably not.
No. So does that mean you can convict him anywhere?
Begs the question, was he given a trial that is as fair as it possibly could be, right?
But is that still a miscarriage?
Reason?
It's still a miscarriage of justice if it's not an objectively fair trial.
True, very true.
So I don't know.
And so this conversation obviously brings up the possibility of there being a retrial, essentially, which is sad to think about too. So Laci's stepfather, Ron, he passed away back in 2008, I believe.
Mm-hmm. He's the one who reported her missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry, not in 2008, in 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he did actually pass away peacefully in his sleep. And then her biological father ended up passing away later the same year of 2018 as well. So that means in the Rocha family, Laci's family, it's pretty much Sharon Rocha, who's Laci Peterson's mother, and her brother that would be involved in any kind of, testimony that would need to be made in regards to this case, which is just kind of sad to think about them having to go through that emotionally.
I don't think in their wildest dreams they would have ever imagined that Scott Peterson would get an appeal.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for the death sentence to be overturned. Scott Peterson spending the rest of his life in prison may seem like a just enough
I don't know.
sentence for some people, for those that do not believe in the death penalty, right? If you believe that he, was properly convicted of murdering his wife and unborn child, then for those people that don't agree with the death penalty, they would maybe suggest that spending the rest of his
Is punitive enough.
life in prison
Sufficiently punitive.
would be appropriate for the crime. Again, just for those people that don't believe in the death penalty, but yeah, I mean.
Okay, so I think he might be able to get an appeal. Do I think he deserves an appeal? Maybe, because a lot of the evidence that was presented at his trial was presented as if it's scientific evidence, but it was not considered scientific evidence. And that's just not in Scott Peterson's case. That's in a lot of cases. There's this really good podcast on Spotify called Junk Science, and they go over all these different forensic procedures that we laymen accept as sound scientific evidence, but they're actually has some artistic liberty, and they're not quite as concrete evidence as
Definitely
it's
not
presented.
concrete, right.
So things like, one of the widely known things would be fingerprints, arson. In Scott Peterson's case, it would be things like the dog sniffer thing, which I don't know, because
you're referring to the dog picking up
Laci's scent at the marina.
boat,
Yeah.
right, or at the marina.
So I have a dog, and she has a ridiculous sense of smell. Like, I do this thing where I'll have her go outside to go to the bathroom, and I will walk around with a treat and drag it around the house, and then I will hide it, or I'll break it up into little pieces and hide it, and she will follow the exact trail. I mean, without even knowing that she was getting a treat, she smells it, she can identify it and follow the exact trail. It's incredible. And she's not a trained, sniffing dog, so they can identify smells that humans cannot identify.
Right.
Or anywhere near, so that includes things like decomposition. Now, I don't know what the training would look like for something like that, but apparently the dog had failed his certification test, and they were calling his credentials, if you will, into question, even at trial. But
can you imagine sitting through that, calling into question the credentials
we'd
of the
like
dog?
to call Spot to the stand. He's like at the stand, like, and they're like, did you or did you not fail your
probably didn't go
certification?
exactly like that, but
No, it certainly didn't. But other than the dog evidence, there was also, what else did they say was presented as? Oh, the tides, which I don't know. I have some faith in the tides, but the issue was the expert that they called was not a tidal expert that studied the movement of human bodies. He was just someone that studied water or something, or he wasn't like a...
His credentials didn't directly apply to a homicide or locating a
And he had
body.
no previous studies, expertise, or anything related. So, that's just a few examples off the top of my head. There's other examples too, and I don't think it's good to trick a jury into thinking your information is scientific evidence when it's not necessarily agreed on in the field as so.
And unfortunately, what we went over before, most of, or literally all of the evidence in regards to this case was circumstantial. There really wasn't anything tying Scott directly to the crime, which I don't find very difficult to believe, just because he was so close to the victim, Laci, right? So
I don't know. I think it's
and he had
possible.
plenty of time to destroy any kind of evidence.
Possible he's innocent, but I don't think it's likely. Just using common sense. 2 weeks before Laci went missing, he told Amber Fry, "It's the first Christmas I'll spend without my wife." Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, it was the first Christmas he spent without his wife. I mean, like, that is, you know, people want scientific, concrete evidence to convict someone, but they didn't always have that.
And prior to DNA evidence, that's actually all jurors usually had to.
Was circumstantial. Do you have an alibi? Does it make sense?
Right.
You know, so, I mean, in his case, his alibi
corroborate your alibi
was where the body was found, you know, and people say, oh, maybe someone else placed it there. Well, that'll be a whole nother discussion, but I do just want to say they were not always right when all they had to work on was circumstantial evidence. And that even applies to as late as like 2000s. Even nowadays, I'm sure there's times where circumstantial evidence can be extremely damning, but it's not accurately, you know, getting someone convicted.
Right.
But they weren't always wrong either. Like, you can use circumstantial evidence to get an accurate conviction.
Yeah.
Not always, but often you can. So I think in this case,
beyond the reasonable doubt.
Do we have, if we don't have anything else to talk about with his appeal?
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because so there are two separate petitions, right? Obviously, the death sentence that was overturned, right? His lawyer, Scott Peterson's lawyer, ended up making a separate petition to basically submit for a retrial. And I guess one of the reasons, in addition to some of the things that you mentioned already, was juror number 7's replacement. Back when they were questioning the potential jurors in regards to whether they had ever been the victim of a crime or ever involved in a lawsuit. Juror number 7's replacement, and her name was, oh my gosh, Rochelle Nice, I want to say. She responded no, as did everyone else that was selected for the jury pool. But it actually turns out that when she was 4.5 months pregnant, she had actually filed for a restraining order against her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, who allegedly threatened her with some form of violence that scared her enough to seek to obtain a restraining order while she was 4.5 months pregnant. So I guess that's just kind of noteworthy, because of course it couldn't be just like any kind of crime that she was a victim of, like a robbery or something. Of course she was 4 months pregnant, right? And so obviously his lawyers kind of ran with that.
So they're saying that the juror didn't disclose pertinent information, basically,
to the case, right? And if she had disclosed that particular information, then she probably wouldn't have been selected for the jury.
She may or may not have been selected, probably not. And then
based on what they're saying, probably
you might have
not.
had one juror that decided he wasn't guilty.
So I guess in their minds it could have completely changed the outcome of
or
the
not.
case. Or
not.
Yeah, and Rochelle did go ahead and release a book later on, as many jurors do. So it just doesn't really look good for her.
I might have to read her book.
Digging all this up. Yeah, and so naturally they're like, okay, juror number 7's replacement wrote a book, left out pertinent information that likely would have, you know, maybe ruled her out from being on the trial. And so it just is kind of a source.
The jurors, I will say, no shade, but they were kind of nasty to Scott in the media.
Yeah, I think we talked about that on the last episode too.
Yeah, that was oof.
But you know what? They say that you are entitled to a trial of a jurors of your peers, and I think that
and nothing more.
If anything, that probably just reflects the attitudes that a lot of people in our nation felt towards Scott.
Oh, certainly.
Just based on, you know, for them it was based on the trial, but for a lot of people following the case, it's based on, you know, the media coverage.
Sentiment, the overall sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even just the charges themselves, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah. So unfortunately, this could go back to trial.
What if we're wrong?
I don't know.
I feel kind of bad.
The crazy thing is if you look into kind of like, where is Scott Peterson now? You won't find him on Facebook. No, I'm just kidding. But most of the articles in regards to like the latest of his motion for an appeal is back in 2020 of April, so almost a year ago. And I can only assume, I haven't really found anything to corroborate this, but you can pretty much only assume that things have been delayed because of the coronavirus, as is true with like R. Kelly's case, if you follow that case at all. So it's pretty much just kind of got a pin in it for now and put on hold.
Like my parking ticket.
So there's really no telling. I mean, there might be something we're missing that we don't know that would mean that, you know, that this wouldn't be going back to trial, or it's very possible that it's very much in the works right now. It's just not being covered heavily by the press. So,
wow. Is there anything else we want to talk about with how the case is outstanding right now?
No, I think that pretty much catches everybody up to speed.
Because it's time for holes in Scott's case.
She is really excited.
I'm really excited
to bust out these notes on y'all.
Okay, so this is one by one. This goes strictly for Scott's suggested timeline of how things happened. So it starts off with holes in Scott's story. Laci mopping the floor. Why is that weird? Well, the maids were literally there the day before. So why would Laci be mopping the floor?
That's a good question.
Why would Laci style her hair and do her makeup before mopping the floor and going to walk the dog and going to bake all day?
No woman has ever styled her hair.
Maybe in like 1950.
You probably slept with rollers and you would just take them out of your hair back in the 1950s, just to guess. But...
And let's just ask our viewers, does anyone mop their floor the day after the maids come? I feel like that's the opposite of what you do after the maids come.
Definitely.
Mess up the floor. Anyway, speaking of messing up the floor, is it possible that Scott messed up the floor somehow? Is it possible that there was a struggle? We don't know. Is it possible that he thought maybe if there was a struggle, even though there was no blood or anything, he might be trying to get like, you know, the face print or whatever, you know, what have you off the floor? You know, just to clear off any evidence if that's the scene of a struggle.
Also, too, I'd like to just pepper in, strictly as speculation, it's not something like wiping the counters, right? Like if you're cooking in the kitchen, you might wipe the counter after you cook. Mm-hmm. That's pretty normal. Washing the dishes. But to mop the floor after you've, you know, been in the kitchen when the maids were just there the day before, I think is an odd thing.
Well, here's another thing that's weird about mopping the floor. She was gonna be cooking in the kitchen. Have you ever cooked in the kitchen and you get like stuff everywhere? It's all over the counters, and especially doing something messy like gingerbread where you're mixing, you got the eggs, you got everything.
And that's what I mean. I don't mean to dive too deep into it, but if I'm gonna be baking on the counter, sometimes, you know, you might clean the counter beforehand, just like if your kitchen's not clean, you want to make sure you have a clean surface to work with. That's not the same though as mopping the floor.
If you're gonna murder your wife in the kitchen, maybe you want a clean floor,
you know.
But the point is, if you're gonna be cooking in the kitchen, why would you mop the floor first? That doesn't make any sense. I think he's just and the fact that he involved himself so much in the mopping. He's like,
filled the mop bucket for
I dumped it out for her after I got back.
That's what it was.
I think he said he filled it too. Maybe it's because she's pregnant. You know, maybe Scott's a stand-up guy, and he's
just trying to show us all what a stand-up guy he really is.
I suppose, but so I thought the mopping the floor thing was weird. It's weird because it doesn't make sense in context of what he said her day was, unless he's wrong about that or just making stuff up so that he, like, you know, oh, I don't want them to think I had something to do with this, whether he did or didn't. He's just trying to fill in her day for her.
Right. Just involve her somehow.
Another thing was his convenient hand injury. Was there a struggle? Did you hurt your hand doing something? He had a cut on his hand. You know, is that necessarily suspicious? No. Is it against the law to cut your hand? No. Is it weird? Yeah.
For someone that was very likely using rope to tie a probably deceased body to cement blocks, it's possible that you could cut yourself doing that.
I have a hard time with is that boat was really small.
Mm-hmm.
So he would use one anchor. I don't know if we mentioned that he had enough cement to make all of those anchors. I mean, he'd have to fit
were 5 anchors.
5 anchors
one
and a body.
Was recovered. And so he said that anchor, and we talked about this.
Would you mean when you say recovered? Do you mean it was recovered from the water, or was recovered from his workshop?
It was recovered from his warehouse. Yes, and so that was what he led law enforcement to believe was an anchor for the boat, but we talked about last time.
Yeah.
It wasn't heavy enough to even weigh the boat down. So they think that he probably didn't even stop while he was, dumping her body.
So I have this in here. I would have to look at, I haven't looked at the case notes to check if this is true or not, but Scott allegedly had a fishing pole with a price tag on it. What I do know is his fishing pole was at Ron's house, because Ron actually fished. The last time Scott had been fishing, he was with Ron's,
R.I.P. Ron.
Laci's stepfather.
Right.
So instead of just being like, hey Ron, I got a boat, I'm going fishing, can I have my fishing pole? Because fishing poles are not cheap. Like,
yeah,
they're not like $20 usually. So he went and bought a new one. That's what I mean. In the very least, he refused to just go get his fishing pole.
Well, if he were to go get that fishing pole, he might have to explain why he wanted it, which would be questionable because Scott was not an avid fisherman.
Right. Well, then yeah, I want my fishing pole. Why?
Why?
I have a boat that I paid for in cash.
And then on top of that too, you could argue that he was buying the fishing pole just to establish that he was fishing that
I don't
day.
think he fished anything that day. I mean, he was only there like an hour.
Yeah, but just so that he could say that he was fishing. Here's my fishing pole.
Um,
How could you tell law enforcement, oh, I've been fishing that day if you have no fishing pole?
Well, in his untouched tackle box, that's another thing. I don't think I wrote that down, but you might just say, well, maybe he bought that fishing pole because he wanted to have his private man time where he goes fishing all year.
Time.
Well, no, he actually bought a fishing pass for like 2 days.
Just 2 days. That's pretty damning by itself.
I think that establishes the intention.
And then also, too, if you go back to his relationship with Amber Fry, he tells Amber Fry that he is spending this Christmas, his very first Christmas, without his wife, right? And then it's between 2 days, it's less than a week after he has that conversation with Amber Fry. That's when he goes and buys the 2-day fishing pass.
I believe he buys the boat the next day and then gets the fishing pass within the week for 2 days.
So it's like a very close timeline of
that kind of establishes like his intention,
motive
even,
right.
So that's why, I think first degree was definitely appropriate to charge because the intent is pretty clear. I mean, you don't buy a boat with a 2-day fishing pass in cash secretly, not tell your family about it, so you can dump a body, and then in case you get caught with your fishing boat, have a fishing pole in your car just in case.
And there are people that love to say, too, that just because Scott had an affair, it does not necessarily mean he's capable of murder. But let's just go back and revisit. Imagine if Amber Fry never came forward. Wouldn't that be crazy to think about? I mean, the implications that she's made in this case are pretty revolutionary, even just by itself. Even if we scratch everything else off the list. He said that he would be spending his very first Christmas without his wife less than a month before
He told her he was hunting in Maine with his dad. He told everyone else he was going golfing. What was he really doing that day? Well, according to him, he was fishing. And that's where Laci was going.
And he only told law enforcement that he was fishing once they figured out, like, hey, Scott, you told everyone you went golfing. We checked and you weren't golfing. So what were you doing? Oh, I forgot I was fishing. How would you make that mistake? How would you make that mistake?
So busy not looking when we were out in the forest looking for her, like...
Yeah, or when he does finally talk.
Sorry, he applied for the fishing license a few days before December 24th and 25th. But he told the police that he last minute decided to go fishing.
Last minute decided to go fishing, but you need a fishing pass.
Because the weather was shitty. So what do you want to do instead of going out on the golf course when the weather is shitty? You want to go sit in a boat out in the shitty weather.
Crime talk time. That's right.
Next of all, Laci's plans for the day was kind of okay. So she mopped the floor, changed her clothes into black pants and a white shirt, which is not what her body was found in. So she probably never did that. But anyway, he says
probably never did it.
She walked Mackenzie before 10:18. Scott claimed to have left the house by 9:30. But the Martha Stewart show, when she actually says the word meringue, which he said he remembers Martha Stewart was making a meringue or something, and Laci was watching it because it was her favorite show, she did not actually use that word until 40 minutes into the show, which gives Laci a very short window to complete all of these tasks. Because they were watching the Martha Stewart show together, and then she mopped the floor, changed her clothes, walked the dog, then gets kidnapped by Satanists or robbers. We don't know which one the defense is going with at this point.
Either way. It could really go either way.
Yeah. Well,
maybe they were Satanist robbers.
Scott Peterson was not an avid fisherman. His lawyer claimed that he often goes fishing and that the baby's room was decorated as a fishing theme because Scott Peterson loved to fish. Well, actually, it was a nautical theme. It was not a fisherman's wharf. It wasn't something like that. Like, it was not. It was like
also,
a deep
Scott,
sea.
who are you fishing with no boat and no fishing pole? Fishing pole has been retired to Ron's garage for the last who even knows how long.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you claim to be an avid fisherman when you don't even know what's required of you to fish?
Well, it makes you also wonder, too, was Laci even alive at all on Christmas Eve? Because he says that she was wearing black stretchy pants and a white shirt, but the forensic pathologist, Brian Peterson, no relation, I assume, describes that she was wearing khaki maternity slacks, which is what she was wearing when they visited her half-sister?
Her half-sister, yes, cut Scott's hair the day before.
So why was she wearing her clothes from the day before? Did she change back into them when she decided after mopping and walking the dog she was going to cook in her khakis?
And also something noteworthy too, right? There was some jewelry that those who knew Laci Peterson said that she never left the house without, or even if she was up like for the day, first thing she would do is put on her jewelry. So if she was going to be doing all of these things and running all of these errands, not concrete, evidence, but definitely can indicate that if she had her jewelry off, she might have gotten ready for bed, and then Scott easily could have killed her the night before. So on the 23rd, before she was reported missing after...
He didn't want her wedding ring. It was in evidence, and they were going to release it back, and before Scott was, going to be convicted or whatever, or be charged, Sharon asked him, she's like, do you want the wedding ring? He's like, nah, I'm good.
But he also sold her house. Well, he was looking to sell their house. He
fully
sold
furnished.
Her car.
Sell her house fully furnished.
While his wife is still missing, which
and could come back any moment.
If you truly believed your wife was missing,
or coming back,
would you want to move? If she was able to escape somehow,
she shows up to the house. There's
to the
different
only
people.
home she knows. Yeah, and it's there's a for sale sign in the front lawn. It just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, he knew something we didn't.
Well, it was weird even that Laci was walking the dog. Sharon in her book says that during Laci's pregnancy, she did not walk the dog every day. In fact, it had been about 4 months since she had walked the dog at all.
And it's also been said that Laci, towards the end of her pregnancy, was having kind of more of a difficult pregnancy. Not necessarily confined to bed rest or anything like that, but I would definitely find it hard to believe that she would, after 4 months of never walking the dog, while she's having kind of a tough time being pregnant in her last trimester.
She gets up, she's like, I'm going to mop the floor, I'm going to walk the dog, I'm going to bake.
Make the cookies.
Gonna do it all.
Walk the dog.
When she's probably exhausted. She's 8.5 months pregnant. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know.
It
Everyone's
sounds
different.
Tough to believe.
I've never been pregnant, so I don't know how difficult that would be, especially having a complicated pregnancy.
As someone who's pregnant, I can tell you that even half of that would be exhausting.
Plenty.
For a lot of people. Maybe not everyone. Everyone's different, but...
Well, she had 2 different fainting spells 4 months before this happened. Sharon Rocha actually speculates that Scott was trying to poison her to have a miscarriage because he didn't want to be a father, because the doctor couldn't find any reason that she'd be having these insane fainting spells. She didn't carry a cell phone on her, so it just wasn't safe for her to go on her own walking the dog like that.
It is somewhat normal or common even while you're pregnant to see spots or feel lightheaded, but to actually pass out and faint is
she was puking and fainting.
Yeah, I mean that...
She wasn't having morning sickness anymore because it was 4.5 months into her pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So she was puking and fainting. This happened 2 different times,
a week apart. Violently ill
then
that. That just doesn't make
stopped
sense.
when she stopped going to the park.
Normally, if you're feeling faint or something like that, it would be first thing in the morning. If you didn't have anything to eat, you're up and moving around. Yeah,
that's not how they described it went down. So next of all, the path was really slick because it had rained. So what would happen is she would go down a shortcut to get into the park to walk the dog, but she was hella pregnant and the path was slick. Why would she shimmy on down the slick path while pregnant that you probably wouldn't even be able to safely go down?
Let's just back it up really quick. So Laci, who in 4 months has never walked the dog that anyone can
After
verify.
mopping the floor.
After mopping the floor.
And styling her hair.
Decides to slide down this
Mudslide.
decides to do a mudslide so that she can walk her dog.
So next of all, those that knew her said it was out of character for her to style her hair before going on a brisk walk, walking the dog.
Out of character for most people.
I know. I just wanted to add that in. But here's another weird thing is in Sharon Roach's book, Scott said he saw Laci styling her hair on her bench and remarked that she looked so cute doing that, trying to flip her hair out like very 2001, you know, like, you know how they would flip the ends out, like, so her sister taught her how to do that day before, and he said she was sitting on the bench doing that, but the half sister was like, the bench is at my workplace. There's no bench in your house.
Duh, Scott, you dummy. He
I
tries
don't know.
He tries to like
I've
throw
never
in
been
like
there.
a convincing detail.
He's like, you know, she looks so cute sitting there on that bench.
And like the bench doesn't
That's what happens
exist.
when you try to fill in
Gaps.
empty time. Like you're trying to fill it in with truths. You get details mixed up like that.
Sloppy work, Scott. Sloppy work.
Sloppier than a mudslide.
Sloppier than a mudslide.
Next of all, Scott found Mackenzie, the dog, who's a male named Mackenzie. Let's just move on from that.
Gender neutral.
Yeah, I think you can name pets pretty much anything. I think as long as you give them a dignified name, it doesn't matter what their name. Like, don't name them something insulting or a joke. Didn't Joseph say they had a dog named like Shithead and they called it Shithid or something?
I don't remember that.
Joseph, if you're out there, what was that dog's name?
Oh my god.
Oh, Meathead.
Meathead.
They made him call him Meathead because they named the dog
It was
Shithead.
like a neighbor or something. Yeah.
That's funny. Anyway,
That's not the name of a dignified dog.
you should name it like
better.
Robert.
Yeah, Roberto.
I think it's hilarious to give dogs human names. You know, the
I like
ancient
it too.
Egyptians used to give dogs names that like about their personalities, but you know what they would call the cats? Meow. That's what they were all called
I mean,
because they're all the same.
makes sense to me.
They're not all the same. I have cats. Anyway, Mackenzie was found with his leash on, and Scott was like, "All right, let's go in the house. Like this seems normal."
Nothing odd here.
And-
Where's my wife?
And it was
None of
odd enough to mention to his mother-in-law, "Hey, I found Mackenzie with his leash on, then I ate some pizza and milk naked in my kitchen and ran upstairs to take a shower." Like, he mentions to his mother-in-law that the dog had its leash on. He even says to her, I didn't think it was weird till you pointed out Mackenzie had his leash on. She's like, what are you talking about? You told me that.
I think, if anything, that just goes to show that he obviously had something to do with Mackenzie being there with his leash on.
Mm-hmm. I think
Especially
so
when
too.
you're dealing with somebody like Scott. That wasn't by mistake that he mentioned that. He also, when he called Sharon
Calculated.
Rocha, used the words
Missing.
Yes, Laci is missing.
Hey,
And
you know
that's-
where Laci's at? I don't know where she's at. I haven't seen her all day.
She's missing. No, like if I came to your house and you weren't there, I wouldn't call everyone and say, oh my God, Lindsay's missing. I would say, hey, do you know where Lindsay's at? Have you spoken with her?
Me, I put my phone on silent when I'm studying, so like, I don't think anyone would
Yeah,
even
she's
think
not here.
to
Where
look
do you
for
think
me.
she is? You know, you wouldn't say she's missing. It's like, that's like 0 to Dateline real quick.
0 to day.
Yeah, like it's so unnecessary.
You know, mom texts Mike all the time and it's like, hey, ask Lindsay, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why did she just ask me? He's like, she did. You just don't check
there
your
you
phone. So I think also we discussed this already. Scott had multiple accounts of what his plans were.
Mm-hmm. Just like he had multiple mistresses.
And did he tell any of those other mistresses that his wife was dead? No, just Amber Fry.
Just Amber Fry. But also, too, that's kind of why I mentioned, and not to get off topic, but imagine if Amber Fry didn't come forward. There are 2 other affairs, allegedly, that police could confirm. And so I don't know the names of those particular women off the top of my head, which just goes to show that they obviously weren't comfortable with that information being publicized. Obviously, they didn't want to be dragged through the mud like Amber Fry.
Bless her.
Thankfully, I feel like most of the coverage in regards to Amber in researching this trial do paint her, you know, in a neutral light. But back during those days, in the media, it didn't
It
look
wasn't
good for
like
Amber.
that.
No, it was not.
They would call her ugly. They'd
Yeah.
call her a tramp. They said she was a homewrecker. They said she had something to do with Laci's disappearance, which she didn't.
But
obviously.
this was also to post Clinton scandal days too, right? So this was very much like anti.
Can you imagine Monica Lewinsky nowadays? Like that.
She would be championed, I think.
Oh my god.
I'm not saying she should be. I'm just saying.
I'm saying she
Me
wouldn't.
Too
She was
days?
like 19.
It would be a completely.
Was she like 21 or 19?
Oh, that's a whole different kind of. Hi. That's like a whole different kind of like I feel like that case would be not a case. That the allegations would go completely different these days.
But I also think
I think
what people were mostly angry about was the lying. I don't think people really cared that he was cheating on Hillary Clinton.
I don't think Hillary even cared that she was cheating.
I think if you have a husband like that, you're not really surprised. And I don't know that their affiliation was even... What are we talking about?
It's like dating NBA players or NFL players. Like, you just assume that they're cheaters, right?
Or musicians.
We're talking about
like not
cheater pumpkin eaters.
Not like I play weddings for a living. Musicians like Steve Tyler with Aerosmith, right? Like, okay, so anyway, back to the case. I just want to wrap this all up by talking about Scott's entire fishing trip just in a few sentences. Scott's family was unaware he owned a boat. His father-in-law went fishing that day and found it odd Scott left for his trip at like 9:30 when he was coming back from his fishing trip that he left for at 4 a.m.
Right.
He was back well before Scott was even on his way. Scott could not remember what type of fish he was fishing for. When investigators asked him, he finally claimed he was fishing for sturgeon, which requires live bait. He didn't bring any live bait. It's a little weird.
So did you catch anything?
He had an unopened bag of fishing tackle in his back seat. So, was there any fishing really going on? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's safe to say.
He was fishing for an alibi.
He was literally fishing for an alibi.
Literally fishing for an alibi.
And last few things we'll wrap up on this episode. There is discussion about whether or not there was a satanic cult. I feel stupid even saying this. I'm sorry.
You're like, I can't even take myself seriously.
Satanist scare. Because, like, if you know
It
anyone...
was a hot button topic at the time.
Back in the late 90s.
It almost
Columbine,
still is, actually.
Satanism.
What is people's obsession with Satanism?
If you know anyone who's part of the Church of Satan, it's not like that at all. I'm not. Don't point to me and say she is. I'm not. Nothing against Satanism or Satanists. But, like, they were afraid of, like, you know, people, you know, killing babies over a pentagram and draining their blood.
It's very reminiscent of, like, the Charles Manson cases.
Yes, which was even
Charles
older.
Manson vibes. Yeah, for sure. So it's like that narrative never really died.
So, anyway, there's speculation that what really happened to Laci Peterson wasn't that her affair-having husband who with a secret boat killed her and dumped her body, which I think just the fact that she was found in her clothes that her cousin said, or her sister said she was wearing the day before, and Scott said she was not wearing that day. I think that just goes to show that's what happened. But they say maybe some Satanists kidnapped her and were going to sacrifice her because there was some other pregnant woman who was found without her limbs and without her head and without her baby. So they think, you know, maybe she was also a victim of Satanism. I don't know enough about that case to really talk about it. But there was also another pregnant woman in Modesto that was almost kidnapped. You know, so they think that Satanism involves sacrificing pregnant women. I know Satanists, that's not what Satanism is about. It's more of like a political commentary that it's even called Satanism. But I'm sure there are devil worshippers out there that actually believe Satan is real. They want to have an alliance with the devil.
Sure.
And do they sacrifice pregnant people? I don't know. We'd like to hear from you, our viewers. So,
does anyone know anyone that's been sacrificed while pregnant?
Next of all, one of the more more discussed possible things that happened to Laci Peterson was one of the felons, I don't know, the guy that was committing the robbery across the street, just threw her, what? I'm gonna have to ban that word. I think I banned that word.
Oh, that's
okay.
Funny.
Sorry. See, look, it's
yeah.
Okay. Sorry, your message got withheld.
Oh.
I banned that word. Anyway, what was I gonna say?
We were talking about
plausible things that happened to Laci Peterson other than her husband murdering her and dropping her body off with a secret boat. They were committing the robbery. She, being nosy and outspoken and short, went over there and was like, hey, what are you guys doing over here? And they absconded the pregnant woman into their vehicle where they had loaded the safe they stole, and then held her for days, delivered her baby, cut all of her limbs off, and then just dumped her into the marina without even using a boat, because you could actually do that in a car. Like, you could actually just, you know. And they say because they kept announcing Scott's alibi over and over, Scott was at the marina, Scott was at the marina, Scott was at the marina, then anybody who was holding Laci, which is very unlikely, that people don't get held like that. And if you're holding a pregnant woman, why don't you just drop her off in like Wyoming or somewhere that no one's ever gonna find her? Like, why are you gonna, like, you know, I don't know. Why would you kill her? You don't even have to kill her. You could just drop her off out in the wilderness and she'll find her way. Like, I don't know.
Well, and then also too, just based on the evidence that Scott had made all of these anchors, right, or cement blocks.
He had an anchor problem.
Based on the condition that Laci's body was found in, missing certain limbs and like head, and basically she essentially was a torso that washed up on shore. Trigger warning.
Too late.
It would, you know, lead anyone who's viewed the details of her autopsy to believe that she was tied down with cement blocks. So that theory kind of doesn't make sense. And this is just kind of me improving and speculating. But for someone to have just dumped her body in the marina with cement blocks to hold her down, and then
they don't have proof that there were cement blocks holding her down.
They don't, but you could easily speculate that just based on her limbs being missing.
The limbs being missing is because she's being held down and the tides rip at your cartilage of your joints. Anyway, as graphic as that was, moving on from that, I'm sure that we're gonna have a follow-up at some point, and we're going to discuss maybe his appeal or something.
I, in a weird way, look forward to post-COVID times for more reasons than one, but I think that there will be an update with this case, and we'll probably be covering something else by then, but we'll have to dive back in, pour the tea.
Are we wrapping this up?
Chime in on it. Yeah, I think so.
Well, next, shall we announce what we're covering next?
Yeah, I'd love to.
I go back to this case all the time because I find it so crazy.
I told one of our friends that we were covering this case, and she was like, this case drives me mental. Like, it still creeps me out to this day.
Slenderman. We're doing the case, the Slenderman murder, in which the victim actually survived, spoiler alert, who actually seems like a really brilliant, amazing survivor. And I'm sure she's about our age by now, because this case is so reminiscent of like middle school era for me, back when like we had the internet and everyone was using like Tumblr and Sims and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that comes up is really reminiscent of that. So I'm really excited to cover it because I know a lot about it. It kind of is. I mean, it's kind of like, oh, I remember when me and my friends would have sleepovers, and you know, there was that weird girl that used to hiss at people in the hallways, like. That's the person that's committing the murder, is that girl.
Well, I think for me personally, the reason that this case is so bothersome is, as someone that hopes to be a parent, it sounds like there are maybe some signs along the way, and we don't want to dive too deep into it or comment on it too much, but I mean, the fact that it's a crime essentially involving children, I think it's every parent's worst nightmare. This case, the Laci Peterson, Scott Peterson case, is like every pregnant woman's worst nightmare. I think the Slenderman case is like every parent's worst nightmare.
Like, that's amazing. Like, I can't wait to get into this story.
So we're really excited to cover that for you guys, and we'll be kind of staying with y'all and updating as needed on the Laci Scott Peterson saga.
We'll eventually have a follow-up, I'm sure. Well, anyways, I didn't even drink my tea over here.
It's probably cold.
Yeah, it is. I just want to say thanks everyone for watching.
Yes.
We'll be back next week. Is that a tent?
No. It's a baseball bat.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Alrighty, well.
We knocked it out of the park today, sister.
Boom.
Thank you all so much for watching, and we will be back with the Slenderman case.
Slenderman is not real.